I'm Abigail Johnson, 22 years old and the first college graduate in my family. My graduation day should have been the proudest moment of my life. Instead, it became a nightmare I'll never forget. After 4 years of working multiple jobs while maintaining Dean's List grades, I finally made it. But during the celebration, I overheard my parents hiss those words that shattered my world, "You're just a leech." Then I saw my mother slip something into my champagne glass. I never imagined my own parents would try to poison me at my graduation party. Before I tell you how my celebration turned into a nightmare, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt unappreciated by the people who should support you most. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Michigan, I always felt like an outsider in my own home. My parents, Julia and Thomas Johnson, had very distinct personalities that shaped our family dynamic in ways I wouldn't fully understand until much later. My mother Julia worked in real estate and was obsessed with status and appearances. Everything in our house had to be perfect when guests came over, but behind closed doors, the atmosphere was cold and tense. She meticulously tracked every expense related to me in a little notebook she kept in her desk drawer. I discovered this when I was 12, accidentally finding pages of calculations including my school supplies, clothes, and even the extra electricity she claimed I used by reading late at night. My father Thomas was an accountant who buried himself in work and remained emotionally distant. He rarely attended my school events, claiming he was too busy with important clients. When he was home, he was either watching TV or criticizing my choices. The only time I saw genuine warmth from him was when he interacted with my younger brother Kyle. Ah, Kyle. The golden child. 3 years younger than me but treated like royalty in our household. While I had to save my allowance for months to buy new shoes, my parents bought Kyle the latest gaming systems the day they were released. When I needed a graphing calculator for advanced math, my mother complained about the cost for weeks. When Kyle wanted an expensive mountain bike, they surprised him with it just because he mentioned liking one in a store window. The disparity in our treatment was obvious to everyone except my parents. My Aunt Barb once questioned my mother about it at a family barbecue, asking why I was working at the local grocery store at 14 while Kyle had no responsibilities. My mother's response still rings in my ears: "Abigail needs to learn the value of money. She costs us so much more than Kyle does." That was the pattern throughout my childhood. Every achievement of mine came with a reminder of how expensive I was to raise. When I won the state science fair in 10th grade, instead of congratulations, my father's first comment was, "How much is it going to cost us to go to the nationals?" I didn't go, despite my teacher's encouragement, because I couldn't bear the thought of being a financial burden. Despite their attitude, or perhaps because of it, I became determined to succeed. I threw myself into academics, knowing education was my ticket to independence. When other kids were hanging out at the mall, I was studying or working part-time jobs. By 16, I was juggling school with 20 hours a week at the local diner, saving every penny for college. My dream was to become a doctor. Not for the money or prestige that might have impressed my parents, but because I wanted to help people. Perhaps it was seeing how my grandmother suffered through cancer treatments, or maybe it was simply wanting to be the caring presence I never had in my own life. Whatever the reason, medicine became my goal, and I pursued it with single-minded focus. When senior year of high school arrived, I applied for every scholarship available. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Taylor, was the first adult who seemed to genuinely believe in me. She stayed after school helping me with applications and wrote recommendation letters that brought tears to my eyes when I secretly read a copy. The day my scholarship to State University arrived was both the happiest and most disappointing day of my high school experience. Happy because I'd earned a full academic ride, covering tuition and books. Disappointing because when I showed my parents, their first response wasn't pride but criticism that I hadn't gotten into an Ivy League school like my cousin Jennifer. State University? That's where people go when they can't get in anywhere better, my mother said, barely glancing at the award letter. Jennifer got into Cornell. That's a real achievement. It didn't matter that Jennifer's parents had paid for expensive SAT prep courses and hired admission consultants, while I had worked alone at our kitchen table with borrowed study guides. In my parents' eyes, I had fallen short again. The summer before college was tense. My parents made it clear that while my scholarship covered tuition, they considered any additional expenses my problem. I picked up extra shifts at the diner and a second job at the mall to save for the dorm supplies and personal expenses I'd need. The day I left for college, my mother handed me a card. For a moment, I thought it might contain an encouraging note or perhaps even a small check to help me get started. Instead, inside was a detailed ledger of all the money they'd spent on me over the years, with "Consider this an investment, we expect returns on" written at the bottom. I folded it up, put it in my pocket, and promised myself I would never ask them for a penny again. Moving into my dorm room at State University felt like breathing fresh air for the first time. My roommate Samantha Wilkins bounced into the room with a bright smile and immediately helped me unpack the few belongings I'd brought. Unlike the designer luggage sets and electronics other students arrived with, my possessions fit into 2 duffel bags and a backpack. "Is your family coming up to help you settle in?" Samantha asked innocently, arranging her collection of photo frames on her desk. "No, they're busy," I replied, the excuse coming automatically after years of practice. The truth was they hadn't even offered. My father had dropped me at the bus station that morning, checking his watch repeatedly and leaving before the bus even arrived. Samantha came from a large, boisterous family in Ohio. Her parents had driven her to campus in a minivan packed with supplies, her 3 younger siblings squabbling in the back seat. When her father noticed my sparse side of the room, he returned that evening with an extra desk lamp, a mini fridge they happened to have in the garage, and a homemade quilt his mother had made. I tried to refuse, embarrassed by the charity, but Mr. Wilkins insisted in a way that preserved my dignity. "Samantha always packs too much," he said with a wink. "You'd be doing us a favor taking some of it off our hands." That first semester was a balancing act between academics and work. My scholarship covered tuition and books, but everything else came from my own pocket. I found a job at the university library that let me study during slow periods and picked up weekend shifts at a coffee shop near campus. Despite working 25 hours a week, I maintained a 4.0 GPA and made the dean's list. When I called home with the news, my mother's response was tepid at best. "Well, I suppose that's what's expected when you're on scholarship, isn't it? By the way, Kyle made the varsity basketball team as a freshman. The coach says he has real potential." Holiday visits home became increasingly uncomfortable. My first Thanksgiving break, I arrived to find my room had been converted into a home office for my father, with my belongings boxed up in the garage. I slept on the sofa for 4 nights while Kyle maintained his spacious bedroom, complete with a new gaming setup. "Don't be dramatic, Abigail," my mother said when I expressed hurt. "You're hardly ever here, and your father needs the space. Besides, Kyle lives here full-time." Each visit brought fresh criticisms. My mother scrutinized my appearance, suggesting I was getting pudgy from dorm food or commenting that my clothes looked second-hand. My father questioned my choice of pre-med, suggesting business would be more practical. "Doctors have to go to school forever. That's years more you'll be dependent," he remarked over Christmas dinner, as if my scholarship and jobs didn't exist. Meanwhile, Kyle dropped out of high school his senior year, claiming he wanted to find himself before college. My parents funded his gap year, which consisted mainly of playing video games and occasionally working at a friend's car detailing business. The double standard was striking but no longer surprising. Junior year brought an unexpected bright spot into my life, Michael Bennett. We met in organic chemistry lab, paired as study partners for the semester. Michael was pre-med like me, brilliant but humble, with kind eyes and a quiet confidence I found immediately attractive. Unlike me, Michael came from a supportive family. His father was a high school science teacher, his mother a nurse. They had modest means but abundant love. The first time I visited their home for dinner, I sat in stunned silence watching their family interactions. They asked Michael detailed questions about his classes, genuinely interested in his answers. They included me in the conversation naturally, never making me feel like an intruder. Your parents must be so proud of your accomplishments, Mrs. Bennet said while serving homemade apple pie. Top of your class in pre-med is impressive. I mumbled something non-committal, uncomfortable with lying but unwilling to expose my family reality. Michael, who had heard bits and pieces of my story over late-night study sessions, smoothly changed the subject. Later that night, sitting on his family's porch swing, I confessed more about my home life than I'd ever told anyone. Michael listened without judgment, then simply held my hand and said, "They're missing out on knowing an amazing person. That's their loss, not yours." My parents' absence became more conspicuous as college progressed. They missed the Dean's List ceremony where I received special recognition. They couldn't find the time to attend when I presented my research at the undergraduate symposium. When I won a prestigious summer internship at Mayo Clinic, my mother's only comment was that Minnesota was too far away and sounded expensive. Senior year brought the culmination of my hard work, acceptance to medical school with a partial scholarship. I called home, allowing myself to hope that this achievement might finally earn their approval. "Medical school?" my father questioned. "Haven't you spent enough time being a student? When are you going to start earning a real living? And where do you expect to live during this medical school?" my mother added. "Because we're not funding this extended adolescence." I ended the call feeling deflated but not surprised. That same evening, Michael's parents called with champagne and congratulations. His mother had tears in her eyes during our video chat. "We always knew you could do it," she said. "We're so proud of you both." The contrast couldn't have been more stark. As graduation approached, I had made peace with the fact that my achievements would never be enough for my parents. I had Samantha, Michael, and a small circle of friends who valued me. I had professors who had become mentors and believed in my potential. I didn't need my parents' approval anymore. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Despite years of disappointment, I couldn't help feeling a flutter of hope when my mother called in April, 2 months before graduation. "Your father and I have been talking," she said, her voice unusually animated. "We'd like to host a graduation party for you at the house. Nothing too extravagant, of course, but we thought it would be nice to celebrate your achievement." I nearly dropped my phone in shock. After years of minimizing my accomplishments, they wanted to celebrate? Part of me was suspicious, but a deeper part, the little girl who had always craved her parents' approval, was elated. "That sounds great, Mom," I said cautiously. "Thank you." "Well, you are the first college graduate in the family," she replied. "We should mark the occasion properly." Over the next few weeks, my mother called frequently to discuss plans. Each conversation left me increasingly uneasy. What had started as "your graduation party" quickly morphed into something else entirely. "I've created the guest list," my mother announced during one call. "The Andersons from next door, the Wilsons from your father's firm, Pastor Roberts and his wife." "What about my friends?" I asked. "Samantha and Lisa?" "And Michael, of course." A pause. "Well, this is more of a family event, Abigail. We don't have room for all your college friends. It's just those 3, Mom. And Michael isn't just a friend, he's my boyfriend of 2 years." Another pause. "Fine, but tell them to dress appropriately. Mrs. Wilson will be there, and she's very connected in the community." Similar battles emerged over every aspect of the party. When I suggested a casual buffet, my mother insisted on a formal seated dinner. When I mentioned my favorite chocolate cake from the local bakery, she had already ordered a champagne-flavored creation from an expensive pâtisserie in the next town, despite knowing I disliked champagne. "It's not about what you like, Abigail. It's about what makes an impression." The Robertsons' daughter had a similar cake at her law school graduation, and everyone raved about it. I tried to remind myself that they were making an effort, however misguided. Maybe this was simply how they showed care, through appearances and social standing rather than emotional connection. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this party wasn't really about celebrating me at all. My suspicions were confirmed when I overheard my parents arguing in their bedroom the weekend I came home to pick up my graduation gown. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but their raised voices carried down the hallway. "This is costing a fortune, Julia," my father complained. "Catering, drinks, decorations, what's the point of all this expense?" "It's expected, Thomas," my mother hissed back. "Everyone knows Abigail is graduating. What would people think if we didn't host something? Besides, it's one last expense before she's finally off our books." "She'd better not expect this kind of treatment for medical school," he grumbled. "For more years of her handout, I can't take it." I crept away, cheeks burning with humiliation. Even now, at the culmination of my undergraduate career, which I had funded myself through scholarships and work, they saw me as nothing but a financial drain. The party wasn't a celebration of my achievement, it was a social obligation and a final farewell to their perceived burden. Despite knowing the truth, I decided to proceed with the party. I had worked too hard to deny myself this milestone celebration, even if the host's intentions were less than pure. Besides, Michael and Samantha had already arranged to attend, driving 4 hours to be there for me. "We'll make it great, regardless of your parents," Samantha promised when I confided my concerns. She arrived the day before the party, ostensibly to help with preparations but really to provide moral support. Michael came that same evening, bringing a beautiful bouquet of flowers for my mother, which she accepted with a thin smile, and offering to help my father set up tables in the backyard, an offer that was curtly declined. The graduation ceremony itself was a blur of emotions. Walking across the stage to receive my diploma, I scanned the audience for my family. They were there, seated toward the back, my father checking his watch and my mother fussing with her hair. Neither looked particularly engaged, even as my name was called as valedictorian. The contrast with the families around them, cheering, taking photos, holding handmade signs, was painful. After the ceremony, Michael's parents found me first, enveloping me in warm hugs and taking dozens of photos. "We wouldn't have missed this for the world," Mrs. Bennett said, straightening my cap. "We're so proud of you." My own parents appeared moments later, offering stiff congratulations before reminding me we needed to get home to prepare for the party. There was no mention of my valedictory speech, which had received a standing ovation from the audience. It was as if they had attended a stranger's graduation rather than their daughter's. Back at the house, the caterers were already setting up. My mother immediately began micromanaging their every move, while my father retreated to his study with the explanation that he needed to handle some work emails before the guests arrived. I changed into the dress my mother had selected, a conservative navy blue number that she deemed appropriate, and came downstairs to help where I could. Samantha and Michael were already arranging flowers and setting out name cards, trying their best to be useful despite my mother's frequent corrections. "This is your party," Samantha whispered as we folded napkins. "Try to enjoy it, no matter what." I nodded, forcing a smile. She was right. After tomorrow, I would return to campus for summer research before starting medical school in the fall. This chapter with my parents was closing. I just needed to get through one last event. Little did I know that the worst was yet to come. By 6 o'clock, our backyard had transformed into an elegant garden party. White fairy lights twinkled in the trees, round tables with crisp linens dotted the lawn, and servers in black uniforms circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played softly in the corner, an expense my mother had added at the last minute after learning the Wilsons' daughter had won at her engagement party. Guests began arriving promptly at 6:30. My extended family came first, aunts, uncles, and cousins I saw infrequently. Then my parents' friends and colleagues, many of whom I barely recognized. By 7, the yard was filled with about 50 people, only 3 of whom had come for me rather than social obligation. "You look beautiful," Michael said, finding me alone by the drinks table. He handed me a glass of water, knowing I was too nervous to drink alcohol yet. "How are you holding up?" "Like I'm at someone else's party," I admitted quietly. "I've been introduced as our daughter, the college graduate, to a dozen people who couldn't care less." Michael squeezed my hand. "2 more hours, then we can escape to that all-night diner you love." His promise of escape kept me going as I navigated the increasingly awkward evening. My mother paraded me around like a show pony, but conversations inevitably turned to my brother Kyle's recent job at a local tech startup, a position secured through my father's golf buddy despite Kyle having no qualifications or experience. He's really finding his path now, my mother gushed to her friend Patricia. So enterprising, starting his career early instead of spending years in more schooling. The barb was directed at me, though Patricia seemed oblivious. And what about Abigail? Medicine, is it? Yes, unfortunately she'll be in school another 4 years at least, my mother sighed, as if my academic achievements were a character flaw. As dinner was served, I found myself seated between my ancient great-aunt Muriel, who was hard of hearing, and my father's colleague Mr. Peterson, who spent the entire meal talking about his golf handicap. Michael and Samantha had been relegated to a table in the far corner with various distant relatives no one wanted to deal with. Midway through the main course, my father clinked his glass for attention. My heart lifted momentarily, perhaps he would say something supportive after all. We'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight to celebrate Kyle's new position at Innotech Solutions, he announced proudly. At just 19, he's already embarking on his career journey. I felt the blood drain from my face. Beside me, Aunt Muriel patted my hand sympathetically. Even she had noticed the slight. And of course, my father added, almost as an afterthought, Abigail's college graduation. A smattering of polite applause followed. I forced a smile, though inside I was crumbling. Michael caught my eye from across the yard, his expression a mixture of outrage and sympathy. After dinner, as servers cleared plates and set up for dessert, I excused myself to the kitchen for a moment of privacy. I stood by the sink, taking deep breaths, telling myself it would soon be over. I didn't hear my parents enter until my mother's voice cut through my thoughts. Playing the victim again, Abigail, she said coldly. Hiding in here while everyone is outside? I turned to face them. I just needed a minute. It's been a long day. It's been a long 22 years, my father muttered, pouring himself another scotch. What's that supposed to mean? I asked, though I knew. I'd always known. My mother stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. You've been nothing but a leech your whole life. Your scholarships, your jobs, all for show. We know you're planning to move back home during medical school. I stared at her, genuinely confused. What? I never said that. I have an apartment lined up near campus. Don't lie, my father joined in. We saw your browser history on the family computer last weekend. You were looking at commuting distances. I had been, but not for me. For Kyle, who had mentioned wanting to find his own place but stay close to his new job. I started to explain, but my mother cut me off. It doesn't matter. The point is, it's time you stopped draining us dry. This party is our last obligation to you. Her words hit like physical blows. Even knowing their true feelings, hearing them spoken so baldly was devastating. I need to get back to the guests, I said, moving toward the door, desperate to escape. Wait, my mother said, her tone suddenly shifting. We have a special toast planned. Let me get your glass ready. She moved to the counter where a single champagne flute sat apart from the others. I watched, still processing our conversation, as she picked it up and examined it. This needs to be perfect for the toast, she said, a strange edge to her voice. What happened next seems almost dreamlike in retrospect. As my father distracted me with a question about medical school costs, I caught a glimpse of my mother's reflection in the window above the sink. She was holding something small over my champagne flute, a prescription bottle. With quick, practiced movements, she shook several pills into the drink, where they began dissolving in the bubbling liquid. I froze, unable to process what I was seeing. Was my mother, my own mother, drugging my drink? The champagne had a slight pinkish tint now, but in the dimly lit kitchen, it wasn't obvious unless you were looking for it. Here we are, she said brightly, turning back with the glass. For our college graduate. We'll call everyone in for the toast in a few minutes. She set the glass on the counter near me, then she and my father returned to the party, leaving me alone with the doctored champagne and my racing thoughts. I stood there, staring at the drink, wondering if I had imagined the whole thing. Perhaps the stress and disappointment of the day were causing me to see things that weren't there. But the longer I looked at the champagne, the more certain I became that it wasn't right. The color was off, and now I noticed tiny undissolved fragments floating near the bottom. Michael appeared in the doorway, his face concerned. "Your mother said you needed help bringing out dessert plates?" he said, though his tone made it clear he suspected this was a fabrication. "Michael," I whispered, motioning him over. "Look at this drink. Tell me if you see anything strange." He examined the glass carefully, then looked at me with alarm. "There's something in it." "What happened?" In hurried whispers, I explained what I'd seen. Michael's face darkened with each word. "That's not just unethical, it's criminal," he said. "We need to." We were interrupted by my mother's voice from the patio. "Everyone, gather round. It's time for a special toast to our graduate." Michael and I exchanged glances. "What do we do?" I asked, panic rising. "Leave it to me," he said firmly. "Just follow my lead and whatever happens, don't drink from that glass." We returned to the yard where guests were assembling in a semicircle. My mother approached, taking the suspect glass from my hands with a tight smile. "Here's your special champagne, dear. Everyone else has theirs." My father raised his glass. "To Abigail, who has finally completed her undergraduate studies. May her future endeavors be." He paused, exchanging a loaded glance with my mother, less taxing on everyone. There was an awkward silence as guests tried to parse his backhanded toast. My mother nudged me. "Drink up, dear. It's a special vintage, just for you." Michael stepped forward smoothly. "Actually, I think we should switch glasses for luck," he said with forced cheerfulness. "It's a tradition at State University, partners sharing the graduation toast." Before anyone could object, he had taken the suspicious glass from my hand and replaced it with his own untouched champagne. My mother's face contorted with alarm. "No, that one is specifically for Abigail," she insisted, reaching for the glass. But it was too late. My cousin Jennifer, standing beside Michael and completely unaware of the situation, had picked up my original glass in the confusion. "To Abigail," she said brightly, and took a deep swig before anyone could stop her. What followed remains the most horrific moment of my life. Within seconds, Jennifer's face flushed deep red. She clutched her throat, gasping for air, then doubled over in pain. "My stomach," she choked out. "Something's wrong, burning." She collapsed onto the patio, convulsing. Guests screamed and backed away. Someone shouted to call 911. Through the chaos, I saw my parents' faces, not concern, but pure terror. Not for Jennifer, but for themselves. My father grabbed my mother's arm, whispering furiously in her ear. She shook her head vehemently, eyes wild. Jennifer's parents knelt beside her. "What was in that drink?" her father demanded, looking directly at me. Before I could answer, Michael stepped forward. "Mrs. Johnson put something in Abigail's glass," he said clearly. "I saw her do it in the kitchen. That's why I switched the glasses, I didn't know Jennifer would take it." All eyes turned to my mother, who had gone deathly pale. "That's absurd," she stammered. "It was just champagne. The girl clearly has an allergy or something." But the evidence was damning. The glass that had fallen from Jennifer's hand showed residue of partially dissolved pills. And Michael wasn't the only witness. Samantha stepped forward to say she'd seen my mother handling pills near the drinks earlier, though she hadn't realized the significance at the time. Jennifer was loaded into an ambulance, her parents accompanying her. The party dissolved into shocked whispers and hasty departures. Through it all, my parents maintained their innocence, claiming a mistake, an accident, anything but the truth. But as police arrived to take statements, the reality was becoming clear to everyone present. My own parents had attempted to drug me at my graduation party. The hospital waiting room felt surreal, harsh fluorescent lights, the antiseptic smell, and the heavy silence broken only by the occasional squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum. Jennifer's parents sat huddled together, their faces drawn with worry. Michael and Samantha flanked me on either side, their presence the only thing keeping me from completely falling apart. 2 police officers stood nearby, occasionally speaking into their radios. My parents had been taken to the station for questioning, though not formally arrested, yet. After what seemed like hours, a doctor emerged to speak with Jennifer's parents. We couldn't hear the conversation, but their visible relief told us she would be okay. Mr. Dawson approached us afterward. They pumped her stomach, he explained, his voice hoarse. Found a high concentration of prescription sleeping pills mixed with the alcohol. She's stabilized now, but the doctor said if she'd drunk the entire glass. He couldn't finish the sentence. I felt physically ill. I'm so sorry, Uncle Robert. I had no idea they would. He held up a hand. This isn't your fault, Abigail. The police have made it clear who's responsible. The toxicology report confirmed what we already knew. The champagne contained crushed Ambien, a prescription sleeping medication known to have dangerous, sometimes fatal interactions with alcohol. The pills matched a prescription in my mother's name, picked up just 3 days before the party. When confronted with this evidence, my parents' story began shifting. First, they claimed it was an accident, pills that had fallen into the drink. Then, when that was disproven by witnesses who saw deliberate action, they suggested it was just a little something to help me relax during the party. Finally, as evidence mounted, they stopped talking entirely, hiring Jeffrey Palmer, the most expensive attorney in town. The investigation uncovered more than just the poisoning attempt. During a search of my parents' home, police found my mother's diary, containing disturbing entries about me dating back years. Abigail is becoming more trouble than she's worth, read one entry from my high school years. Always needing money for school trips and activities. Thomas says we should start planning how to cut her off completely after graduation. Another entry, dated just a month before the party, I spoke with her advisor about moving home during medical school. Claimed she has other arrangements, but we know the truth. For more years of demands. Thomas suggested we need a more permanent solution to the problem. The diary provided context for what might otherwise have seemed unthinkable, parents attempting to harm their child. The entries revealed years of escalating resentment and financial calculation, painting me not as a daughter but as a burden they were desperate to eliminate. Meanwhile, I was staying with Michael's family, too traumatized to be alone and unwilling to return to the house where my parents had plotted against me. Mrs. Bennett treated me with a gentle kindness that threatened to undo me completely. She never pushed for details about the incident but made sure I ate, slept, and attended the therapy sessions arranged by victim services. You have a home here for as long as you need, she told me, and I believed her, something I realized I had never felt with my own parents. The community reaction was intense. What had been a private family dysfunction was now headline news. Parents allegedly poisoned daughter at graduation party. Neighbors who had attended the party gave interviews describing the chilling moment when Jennifer collapsed and the subsequent revelation. My high school teachers expressed shock but also mentioned noticing concerning dynamics years earlier. Abigail would come to school exhausted from working late shifts, while her younger brother seemed to have everything handed to him, my former English teacher told a reporter. I tried to address it with her parents once during a conference, but they dismissed my concerns. Throughout the investigation, my brother Kyle's reaction evolved in unexpected ways. Initially, he sided fiercely with our parents, accusing me of exaggeration and attention-seeking. But as evidence accumulated and he was interviewed multiple times by detectives, cracks appeared in his certainty. The turning point came when investigators revealed financial documents showing years of deception. My parents had told me no college fund existed for me, forcing me to rely on scholarships and work. In reality, my grandparents had established trust funds for both Kyle and me. But while Kyle's remained untouched for his future use, mine had been systematically drained by my parents for luxury purchases, including a boat, timeshare in Florida, and my mother's extensive jewelry collection. When Kyle learned this, along with the fact that our parents had hidden a substantial inheritance meant for me from our great-aunt Beatrice, his allegiance shifted dramatically. I had no idea, he told me during a tense meeting at a local coffee shop, his first attempt to reach out since the incident. They always said you chose to work because you were stubborn and independent. They said the scholarships were your choice because you refused their help. And you believed that? I asked, still raw with hurt. Despite seeing how they treated me compared to you our entire lives? He looked down, ashamed. I wanted to believe it. It was easier than admitting what was happening. I'm sorry, Abigail. I should have seen it. His apology couldn't erase years of painful family dynamics, but it was a start. Kyle eventually became a witness for the prosecution, testifying about the pattern of favoritism and psychological abuse he had observed and benefited from throughout our childhood. As the case progressed toward trial, my parents' attorney proposed a plea deal. They would plead guilty to lesser charges of reckless endangerment and adulteration of food with intent to harm, avoiding the more serious attempted murder charges initially discussed. In exchange, they would receive probation, mandatory psychological counseling, and a restraining order preventing contact with me. The prosecutor explained the offer during a meeting in her cluttered office. It's a solid deal, Abigail. They'll have felony records, and the restraining order gives you protection. A trial would be lengthy, expensive, and honestly, traumatic for you. I understood the practicalities, but part of me wanted my day in court. Wanted to force my parents to sit and listen as I described the lifetime of emotional abuse that had culminated in this final, physical attempt to harm me. But another part, the part that was trying to heal, wanted it over with, wanted to focus on building my future rather than dissecting my past. After long discussions with my therapist, Michael, and Jennifer, who had recovered fully and become an unexpected ally, I agreed to the plea deal with one condition: I would deliver a victim impact statement at sentencing. I needed them to hear, at least once, the full truth of what they had done. The day of sentencing arrived 6 months after the graduation party. The courtroom was packed with spectators and reporters, drawn by the sensational nature of the case. My parents sat stiffly at the defense table, dressed conservatively, looking more like accountants facing a tax audit than parents who had tried to poison their daughter. When called to speak, I approached the podium with shaking hands but a steady voice. I had prepared for this moment, had written and rewritten my statement dozens of times. Now, facing my parents directly for the first time since the party, I spoke from the heart. The physical act that brings us here today, the attempt to drug me with a potentially fatal combination of sleeping pills and alcohol, did not happen in isolation, I began. It was the culmination of a lifetime of emotional abuse, neglect, and resentment. For as long as I can remember, I was treated not as a beloved child but as a financial burden, a problem to be solved. I detailed specific incidents throughout my childhood and adolescence, the differential treatment between my brother and me, the constant reminders of my cost, the sabotaging of opportunities, the withholding of emotional support during my achievements. Despite all this, I worked my way through college without their help. I earned scholarships, worked multiple jobs, and graduated at the top of my class. I secured admission to medical school with financial aid. I solved the problem of my existence without them, yet still they couldn't bear to see me succeed. I looked directly at them as I concluded. The most painful realization isn't that they tried to hurt me. It's that they never tried to love me. Today doesn't bring me satisfaction or closure. But it does bring the official end of my attempts to earn the love of parents who were never capable of giving it. The courtroom was silent when I finished. My father stared stonily ahead, but my mother's carefully composed facade had cracked, tears streaming down her face, though whether from remorse or self-pity, I couldn't tell. The judge's words to my parents were scathing. In my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a fundamental betrayal of parental duty, he said. Your daughter deserved protection, support, and love. Instead, you gave her criticism, neglect, and ultimately, attempted harm. The court accepts the plea agreement, but be clear, this leniency reflects the wishes of your daughter, who has shown more maturity and compassion than you deserve. He imposed the maximum probation period allowed under the agreement, 5 years, along with weekly psychological counseling, community service at a youth shelter, and a permanent restraining order. Additionally, he ordered financial restitution for therapy costs and the return of funds that should have been in my trust. As a final act of separation, I filed paperwork the following week to legally change my last name. I chose Bennett, not because of my relationship with Michael, though that was growing stronger, but to honor the family that had shown me what parental love should look like. It was symbolic, a way of saying I was creating a new identity unshackled from the Johnson legacy of resentment and calculation. Medical school would have to wait a year. The trauma of the incident and subsequent legal proceedings had taken a toll, and my therapist recommended taking time to heal before embarking on such a demanding program. The medical school was understanding, granting a deferment with no questions asked once they became aware of the circumstances. It was during this unexpected gap year that I would truly begin to rebuild my life from the ashes of betrayal. The preliminary hearing for my parents' case was scheduled for a rainy Tuesday in September, 3 months after the graduation party incident. I arrived at the courthouse flanked by Michael and his parents, who had become my surrogate family during this nightmare. A small group of reporters gathered outside, hungry for details of the sensational case that had shocked our community. Prominent couple accused of poisoning daughter at graduation celebration. Inside, the courthouse was all polished wood and hushed voices. My parents were already seated at the defense table with their attorney, Jeffrey Palmer, a man known for defending wealthy clients with deep pockets and shallow morals. My mother had lost weight, her designer suit hanging loosely on her frame. My father looked older, the lines around his mouth deeper than I remembered. Neither looked in my direction as I entered. "Are you ready for this?" Michael whispered, squeezing my hand. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, though in truth I felt nauseated and lightheaded. The hearing itself was brief but revealing. The prosecution presented the physical evidence, the toxicology report showing Ambien in the champagne, the prescription bottle with my mother's name, the diary entries documenting their resentment. They also had witness statements from Michael, Samantha, and several party guests who had observed suspicious behavior. Palmer's defense strategy quickly became clear: paint me as a manipulative, attention-seeking daughter who had fabricated or exaggerated the incident to punish parents who were simply trying to set appropriate boundaries. "The Johnsons have supported their daughter throughout her life," Palmer argued smoothly. "They provided a home, education, and opportunities many would envy. Yet Ms. Johnson has consistently portrayed herself as neglected and abused. This alleged poisoning is simply another attempt to vilify parents who were perhaps imperfect but certainly not criminal." The blatant rewriting of my childhood made my blood boil. I had supported myself through college. I had worked since age 14 to pay for my own necessities. The only opportunities I'd received came through my own efforts and the kindness of teachers and mentors who recognized my potential. When my parents took the stand, they presented a united front of concerned, misunderstood parents. My mother dabbed at non-existent tears as she described how Abigail has always been sensitive and prone to misinterpreting our actions. My father spoke about financial pressures and how they had sacrificed everything for our children's futures. Their performance might have been convincing to strangers, but it collapsed under cross-examination. When confronted with financial records showing they had misappropriated my trust fund while claiming poverty to me, they had no credible explanation. When presented with my mother's diary explicitly mentioning a permanent solution to the problem, her claim that she meant financial solutions rang hollow. Most damning was the testimony from Jennifer, who described the excruciating pain and fear she experienced after drinking the doctored champagne. "It felt like my insides were being torn apart," she said quietly. "The doctors told me if I'd consumed the entire glass, or if I were smaller in stature, it could have been fatal." The judge found sufficient evidence to proceed to trial, setting a date for January. Outside the courthouse, Palmer gave a practiced statement about his client's innocence and their confidence in the legal process. I declined to speak to reporters, but the district attorney made it clear the state was pursuing this case vigorously. "The evidence of premeditation and intent to harm is substantial," she told the assembled press. We intend to seek justice for Ms. Bennett. My recent name change had confused some reporters, which provided an unexpected layer of privacy as some articles continued to look for comments from Abigail Johnson, a person who no longer existed legally. The weeks following the hearing brought unexpected revelations about my family's finances. The court-ordered financial discovery process revealed a pattern of deception extending far beyond what I had imagined. Not only had my parents depleted my trust fund from my grandparents, but they had also hidden an inheritance from my great-aunt Beatrice that was specifically designated for my education. Additionally, they had taken out loans in my name during my early college years, a clear case of identity theft that explained the mysterious credit issues I'd encountered when applying for apartment leases. When confronted with these discoveries, my brother Kyle was as shocked as I was. "They told me the boat and the Florida condo were from Dad's work bonuses," he said during one of our increasingly frequent meetings. "They said you had refused your share of Great-Aunt Beatrice's money because you were too proud to accept help." The systematic financial abuse explained so much about my childhood, why there was always money for Kyle's activities but never mine, why my college fund had unfortunately been depleted by market downturns, why my parents had become increasingly anxious as I approached graduation. They had been using my inheritance and identity for years, and my impending independence threatened to expose their scheme. Kyle's reaction to these revelations marked a significant shift in our relationship. Having initially defended our parents, he now found himself questioning everything about our upbringing. "I always thought I was the favorite because I was somehow better," he admitted during a painful conversation at my temporary apartment. "More talented, more likable. It never occurred to me that it wasn't about me at all, it was about using me as a tool to hurt you." His awakening to our family's toxic dynamics was difficult to watch but ultimately healing for both of us. Kyle began therapy to process his role as the golden child and the complex guilt that came with that position. He also took practical steps to separate himself financially from our parents, moving out of their home and finding his own apartment near his workplace. "I can't live there anymore," he told me. "Not knowing what they did to you. Not knowing I was part of it, even unknowingly." As the trial date approached, my parents' financial situation deteriorated rapidly. Legal fees were mounting, and the financial investigation had frozen many of their assets. Their social standing in the community had collapsed completely, former friends crossed the street to avoid them, their country club membership was quietly revoked, and my father's accounting clients began taking their business elsewhere. Facing mounting pressure from all sides, my parents made a surprising decision: they would accept a plea deal rather than face trial. Their attorney contacted the district attorney with an offer, and after several rounds of negotiation, an agreement was reached. The terms were significant: guilty pleas to felony charges of adulteration of food with intent to harm and reckless endangerment. In exchange, they would avoid the more serious attempted murder charges and receive sentences of probation rather than incarceration. Additionally, they would be required to attend mandatory counseling, perform community service, and abide by a permanent restraining order keeping them at least 500 feet from me at all times. The financial settlement was equally substantial. They would repay all misappropriated funds from my trust and inheritance, plus interest. They would also cover my therapy costs and medical school expenses equivalent to what would have been available had they not depleted my educational funds. My initial reaction to the plea offer was mixed. Part of me wanted the public vindication of a trial, wanted them to face the maximum consequences for their actions. But another part, the part focused on healing and moving forward, recognized that a lengthy, high-profile trial would keep me tethered to the trauma indefinitely. "What do you want to do?" my therapist asked during a session dedicated to discussing the plea offer. "Not what makes logical sense, not what other people expect, what do you want?" After careful reflection, I decided to accept the plea agreement with the addition of my victim impact statement at sentencing. The district attorney was supportive of my decision. "This gives you certainty and closure," she explained. "A trial would mean months of preparation, testimony, and no guaranteed outcome." The day my parents formally accepted the plea deal, I felt a strange mixture of relief and grief: relief that the legal process was nearing conclusion, grief for the loving family I had never had and now never would. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for early December, a cold, gray day that matched my mood. The courtroom was less crowded than the preliminary hearing but still contained several reporters and curious community members. My support system filled the first row: Michael and his parents, Samantha, Jennifer and her family, and Kyle, sitting somewhat apart as if unsure of his place. My parents entered wearing subdued colors, both noticeably thinner and older looking than they had been at the graduation party 6 months earlier. My mother attempted to catch my eye, but I kept my gaze fixed on the judge's bench, unwilling to engage. The proceedings began with the prosecutor summarizing the case and the terms of the plea agreement. She emphasized the premeditated nature of the poisoning attempt, the history of emotional abuse, and the financial exploitation that had preceded it. This case represents one of the most fundamental betrayals possible, she concluded. Parents are meant to protect their children, not harm them. The state believes this agreement appropriately balances punishment with rehabilitation, while prioritizing the victim's need for closure and safety. When it was my turn to speak, I approached the podium with the pages of my statement clutched in trembling hands. But when I looked up, facing my parents directly for perhaps the last time, I set the papers aside. I wanted them to hear my unfiltered truth, not a carefully crafted speech. For most of my life, I believed something was fundamentally wrong with me, I began, my voice stronger than I expected. I believed I was inherently unlovable, inherently a burden, because the two people who should have loved me most in the world treated me as an unwanted obligation. I worked myself to exhaustion trying to earn the love and approval you gave so freely to my brother. I recounted specific memories, being left at school for hours after events because they forgot to pick me up, celebrations for Kyle's C grades while my academic achievements went unacknowledged, the detailed expense ledger my mother had given me before college. I now understand that the problem was never me, I continued. The problem was your own inability to love, your view of children as possessions or investments rather than human beings deserving of care. What you did at my graduation party was merely the culmination of a lifetime of calculated cruelty. I looked at each of them directly. I don't expect you to ever truly understand the damage you've caused. But I want you to know that despite everything, I am building a life filled with genuine love and support. I will become a doctor, I will help others, and I will create a family of choice that functions with love rather than resentment and manipulation. Your attempt to harm me has failed in every possible way. As I returned to my seat, Michael reached for my hand, his eyes shining with pride. Behind me, I heard my mother softly crying, though whether from remorse or self-pity was impossible to determine. The judge delivered a scathing admonishment before announcing the sentence. In my 3 decades on the bench, I have seen many disturbing family situations, but few that reach this level of calculated betrayal, he said gravely. That you would attempt to harm your own child, a young woman who by all accounts has conducted herself with dignity, hard work, and perseverance despite your treatment, speaks to a profound moral failure on your part. He accepted the plea agreement but imposed the maximum probation period allowed, 5 years, along with weekly psychological counseling, 200 hours of community service at a youth shelter, and a permanent restraining order. Additionally, he ordered immediate financial restitution according to the terms negotiated. Let me be clear, the judge concluded, looking sternly at my parents. This leniency reflects the wishes of your daughter, who has shown more maturity and compassion than you deserve. Should you violate any term of this probation, including the restraining order, you will face immediate incarceration. With the bang of his gavel, the legal chapter of this ordeal closed. My parents were escorted from the courtroom through a side door, avoiding the reporters waiting outside. I left through the main entrance, surrounded by my chosen family, head held high despite the camera flashes and shouted questions. How does it feel to have closure? One reporter called out. I paused briefly. This isn't closure, I replied honestly. It's just the beginning of healing. That evening, surrounded by those who truly cared for me, I completed the paperwork to legally change my name from Johnson to Bennett. It wasn't about my relationship with Michael, though that continued to deepen. It was about claiming an identity untainted by the toxic legacy of my birth family. It was my first step into a future of my own design. The year following the sentencing was both the most challenging and most transformative period of my life. With medical school deferred for 12 months, I found myself in an unexpected limbo, free from the immediate threats and legal battles but faced with the daunting task of rebuilding my identity from the ground up. Michael's parents insisted I stay with them initially, transforming their guest room into a space that felt like my own. "Family takes care of family," Mrs. Bennett said simply when I tried to discuss rent or a timeline for moving out. "And like it or not, you're family now." The uncomplicated acceptance they offered became my first lesson in what healthy love looked like. Mr. Bennett helped me navigate the financial settlements resulting from the court case, while Mrs. Bennett simply made sure I ate regular meals and had someone to talk to on days when grief overwhelmed me. Therapy became the cornerstone of my healing process. Twice weekly sessions with Dr. Leanne Carter, a specialist in family trauma, helped me untangle the complex emotions surrounding my parents' betrayal. "What you're experiencing is complicated grief," she explained during an early session. "You're mourning not just the relationship you had with your parents, but the relationship you should have had, the loving, supportive parents you deserved but never received." Those words unlocked something in me. I had spent so many years believing I was somehow deficient, that if I just achieved more, complained less, or needed less, my parents might finally love me. Accepting that their inability to love had nothing to do with my worthiness was both liberating and devastating. Why couldn't they love me? I asked Dr. Carter during a particularly difficult session, tears streaming down my face. What was so fundamentally wrong with me that my own parents wanted to harm me? "Nothing was wrong with you, Abigail," she said firmly. "Some people are incapable of healthy love and attachment. Your parents' actions reflect their deficiencies, not yours." Gradually, I began to internalize this truth. The nightmares about the graduation party grew less frequent. The reflexive flinch when someone offered help began to fade. The constant internal calculations, how to be smaller, less needy, less visible, quieted. 3 months after the sentencing, I felt strong enough to find my own apartment. It was a small one-bedroom near the hospital where I would eventually do my medical school rotations. Michael helped me move in and gave me a house plant as a housewarming gift. "Something that grows," he said with a smile. "Like you." That apartment became my sanctuary, the first space that was truly mine, decorated according to my preferences without consideration for anyone else's judgment. I painted the walls a soft blue, hung artwork that spoke to me, and arranged furniture for comfort rather than appearance. Every choice, no matter how small, was an exercise in reclaiming agency. Meanwhile, connections with extended family evolved in unexpected ways. Some relatives who had witnessed my parents' behavior over the years reached out with apologies for not intervening sooner. My Aunt Barbara, my mother's sister, visited with tears in her eyes. "I saw how they treated you compared to Kyle," she admitted. "I said something once or twice, but when your mother got defensive, I backed down. I should have done more." Her regret was genuine, but I had learned enough in therapy to recognize that absolving everyone else's guilt wasn't my responsibility. "Thank you for acknowledging that," I said simply. "Moving forward, I'd like to have a relationship with you on our own terms, separate from my history with my parents." Other relatives chose sides, sending angry messages accusing me of destroying the family with exaggerated claims and attention-seeking behavior. I blocked their numbers without response, another act of self-protection that would have been unthinkable to my people-pleasing former self. The most complicated relationship to navigate was with Kyle. My brother had been as much a victim of our parents' toxic dynamics as I had, albeit in a different way. Where I had been scapegoated, he had been placed on a pedestal, creating a false sense of superiority that was now crumbling. "I don't know who I am anymore," he confessed during one of our coffee meetings. "Everything I thought about myself, about our family, was a lie. If I wasn't actually the golden child who deserved special treatment, then who am I?" "You're someone figuring it out, just like me," I told him. "The difference is you have to unlearn privilege while I have to unlearn shame." Kyle began his own therapy journey, moving out of our parents' house into an apartment across town. He enrolled in community college courses, attempting to find his own path rather than the one our parents had laid out. Our relationship remained fragile but genuine, built on shared understanding of the dysfunction we had escaped. 6 months after the sentencing, an unexpected letter arrived from my maternal grandmother, who had been largely absent from my life due to living overseas. Inside was a bank check for a substantial amount and a brief note: "I always set aside something for your education. Your mother told me you refused my help, but I see now that wasn't true. It's yours, no strings attached." The inheritance provided financial security I had never known, eliminating the need to work during medical school and allowing me to focus entirely on my studies. More importantly, it represented a connection to family that wasn't tainted by manipulation or conditions. As my deferred enrollment in medical school approached, I felt increasingly confident in my chosen path. The trauma I had experienced gave me a unique perspective on patient care and empathy. During volunteer hours at a local clinic, part of my preparation for returning to academics, I found myself particularly drawn to working with children from difficult home situations. "You have a gift for this," Dr. Martinez, the clinic director, observed after watching me calm a frightened 10-year-old during a procedure. "Some people understand trauma intellectually, but you connect at a deeper level." That observation sparked an idea that would eventually become my life's work: creating a support program for first-generation college students estranged from their families. Working with the university's Student Services Department, I developed a framework for peer mentoring, emergency financial assistance, and psychological support specifically tailored to students navigating higher education without family backing. The program launched with a small grant 3 months before I began medical school, with 5 mentors supporting 15 students. By the end of its first year, it had tripled in size and secured permanent funding from the university. Seeing students thrive despite family dysfunction gave purpose to my pain in ways I couldn't have imagined during those dark days after the graduation party. My relationship with Michael deepened throughout this period of transformation. Having witnessed the worst moment of my life and stood firmly by my side, he had seen me at my most vulnerable and loved me anyway. Our connection evolved from romantic partners to true life allies, facing challenges together with a strength that came from absolute trust. "I want you to know," he said one evening as we walked through the park near my apartment, "that I'm in this for the long haul. Whatever you need, space, support, or just someone to listen, I'm here. No pressure, no timeline." His patience as I worked through trust issues and occasional reflexive withdrawals demonstrated a maturity rare in someone our age. When he proposed a year later, as I was completing my first semester of medical school, it felt like the natural progression of a relationship built on mutual respect and genuine care. One final unexpected encounter occurred shortly before I returned to my studies. Shopping for groceries at a store across town, I literally bumped carts with my parents, the first time I had seen them in person since the sentencing. The restraining order had exceptions for accidental public encounters, though they were required to maintain distance once aware of my presence. My mother looked startled, then hopeful. My father seemed uncomfortable but managed a stiff nod. "Abigail," he said formally. "You're looking well." "It's Abigail Bennett now," I corrected calmly, surprised by my own composure. "We've been in counseling," my mother interjected quickly. "We've come to understand some things about ourselves, about how we treated you. Perhaps someday we could." I held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "I wish you well with your therapy," I said sincerely. "I hope you both find peace and growth. But my life has moved forward without you, and that's how it needs to remain." Their faces registered disappointment but not surprise. With a final nod, I turned my cart and walked away, my heart beating steadily, my hands firm on the handle. There was no panic attack, no flood of tears, no rage, just the quiet certainty that I had made the right choice for my well-being. That moment in the grocery store crystallized how far I had come. The wounded girl who had desperately sought her parents' approval had been replaced by a woman who understood her own worth, independent of others' validation. The cycle of toxic family dynamics that had damaged generations before me had been broken. As I prepared to begin medical school, Surrounded by genuine support, engaged to a partner who valued me completely, and connecting with students through the program I had created, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. The attempt to poison me, intended as my destruction, had instead catalyzed my liberation. I now understand that family isn't defined by blood but by love and respect. True strength comes not from never being wounded but from healing and helping others heal. And sometimes, the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to walk away from those who cannot love us properly, making space for those who can. If you've stayed with me through this story, perhaps you've recognized elements of your own family dynamics or personal struggles. Remember that your worth isn't determined by those who failed to see it. Your value doesn't diminish because someone else couldn't appreciate it. And your future isn't limited by your past. Have you ever had to create boundaries with toxic family members? What helped you move forward? Share your experience in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if this story resonated with you. Sometimes the family we choose becomes more important than the family we're born into, and I'd love to hear how you've created your chosen family. Thank you for witnessing my journey, and remember, you deserve to be surrounded by people who cherish rather than diminish you.